Welcome, folks. Glad you could be with me today. Thought I'd talk about something I know I haven't covered before, because I said one of the many things that I don't use because there's no need for it is a rear cinch. And today I'm going to talk about rear cinches and, well, part of their use and how to adjust them a little bit. Well, actually, I'm going to talk about adjusting a whole bunch of stuff on the saddle, because I just bought another saddle, and this one, which will only be the second one I've ever owned, actually came with rear cinch. And so since it's got one, I'll show you how to adjust it and how to tighten it and, well, things like that, because there's a lot of different ways of doing things, and I've actually come across a lot of different notions on how tight the rear cinch should be. And, well, I'm going to give you my opinion, and, well, I'm going to throw in a few other things I've heard people say, just because I'm not going to say there's one right way. You know, I mean, I think for the purpose they're intended for, there probably should be a certain way of doing it. But, well, let me get into that in a minute here, and I'll explain it all to you. Perhaps before we get started, I'm actually going to undo the cinch and rear cinch and show you exactly what they look like, so when I'm talking about the various parts, you'll understand what I'm explaining to you. But just before we get into that, because I've got all kinds of things on this saddle that I've had to adjust a lot of different things. I had to buy some new parts. Like, one of the things I always do when I get a new saddle is I buy a new cinch for it anyhow. Well, this one actually didn't even come with a cinch. It didn't come with the offside piece or the latigo on the other side. I had to buy all those, so, you know. But fortunately, the stirrups on this one are already big enough for my big feet, so I didn't even have to buy the oversized stirrups, which I'm inclined to do on my saddles. My last one I had, well, actually, one of my other saddles, I actually went out when I got it. One of the first things I did was buy new stirrups for it, because they generally come in two different sizes, and the standard size that most saddles have are just a little bit too snug, and there's a chance of my foot getting stuck in the stirrup, and, well, that's not something you want to have happen. Where do you think you're going? Anyhow, so I'm going to go around the other side here in a minute. Oh, I was going to rant about something too first. That's what it was. Hang on. You got to hear my rant first. My rant is about YouTube. Yeah, I know I'm playing with fire there, because, hey, I do YouTube videos. I'm a YouTuber, sort of. Well, I don't make any money at it, though. So I don't know if I'm really a YouTuber or not, although I've got, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of videos. For some reason, people that have been doing them much less time than me have got thousands and thousands of subscribers and tens and hundreds of thousands of hours of watch time and all this stuff. And for some reason, I've been doing this now for, I don't know, 6, 7 years, something like that. I've been doing these things long before YouTube was a household name, actually. I just kind of got the notion that, you know, I knew information's hard to get. Good information, anyhow, is hard to get about horses. And so I thought it only made sense to start doing some videos on the subject. Now, even after 7 years of doing this, I've only got 850 subscribers and less than a quarter of the amount of watch time necessary to get any kind of financial compensation from YouTube as well. And the numbers keep going down. Makes no sense whatsoever. Obviously, YouTube, there's something going on. I don't know exactly what, but something is going on, because, you know, with 850 subscribers, I should have more than 50 views on a video. And they've actually been getting fewer and fewer all the time. The numbers have gone down. Now, I know at one point, I think they changed the way they were counting views, and everybody's views went down. But mine have continued to go down, and sometimes they go backwards. Now, they must think I don't even notice this stuff, but even my most recent video, I watched it go up. It only got up to about 15, all of a sudden it went back to 10. And it took like days to get there. Like, what the heck? I got other videos that have got, well, some of the older ones. I got one, I think, has got like 30,000 views. And, you know, well over 100, it was pretty common. If I didn't hit 100, I was disappointed. Now I'm lucky if I can even hit 20. Most of my, I think you'd have to scroll through quite a few before you could even find one that's at 50. So, you know, there's no question that something's going on. And, you know, I don't know what, but when it comes to making my views or my videos visible to people in their searches or suggested videos or whatever, obviously YouTube is not doing the job, or these people that are subscribing aren't actually even watching the videos that they get notifications on, or maybe they're not even getting notifications. I don't know. It just, there's something not right. So I really need your help here, because obviously I'm getting messed with here somehow. Anything above and beyond that is speculation as to exactly what's going on. So we'll just leave it at that. We'll just say something's not right, and I need your help. So any opportunity you get, whether it's on social media, or in emails, or anything like that, share my videos with your friends. Share my channel with your friends, because I can't do this alone. I want to help people with their horses, but if nobody gets to see my videos, it's kind of hard to do that. And I'm getting a little frustrated because of the fact that, you know, like I said, I've been doing this now for 6-7 years. And, you know, there's guys that have only been doing it for a couple of years that have got thousands of subscribers and tens of thousands of views. You know, so there's obviously, very clearly, something's going on. I don't know what. It would only be speculation to say what, but something's going on. So please, help me out here. Do your part. If there's anything useful in any of my videos, please share them with your friends, okay? I need you to do this for me, because it's the only way that people are going to get to see them, because YouTube's not doing their job, obviously. So I need you, the viewers, to share links to my videos, individual videos that you think are helpful, and links to the channel. You know, please share them as often as possible until people start getting annoying, until you get annoyed and say, hey, stop doing that. You know, keep sending them. Send them links in the email. Send them links in your messages. Send them, post links to the videos on your social medias, whichever one you happen to be on, because there's quite a few of them. And, you know, help me out a little here, because, you know, if you think there's something useful in my videos, well, I'm sure somebody else will too, but they're never going to know about this stuff if you don't share it with them, because obviously somebody else is not doing their job. Okay, now that we are done our little rant, I'm going to go let down the cinch and the rear cinch on the other side, so I can show you exactly what we're talking about here when I describe certain parts. I'm also going to have to go get my horse and bring him back here to stand in front of the camera where he's supposed to be, so I can show you this stuff, because it's all stuff you need to know, and not everybody knows this stuff, because, you know, like I said, nobody's born knowing anything. It's all stuff you got to learn, and if nobody ever teaches you, you're never going to know. And I think I got a pretty good handle on most of this stuff, but I'm not perfect, and you know, I could be wrong on some things too. So that's why I always preface what I'm going to show people by saying, "Hey, this is my opinion," because I've done research on these very topics myself, trying to find information, and it's very conflicting. There's lots of different information on you know, what is correct in how you do things. And well, that's why I'm doing this video, is so I can show you what I think is correct, and you can decide for yourself, because what I have concluded is correct is based on some logic, common sense, some physics, and a lot of other stuff that just I put together, and I've kind of figured out that maybe this is how it should be done. And you know, taking into account all the various articles I've read or videos I've watched and everything else, and I put them all together and I go, okay, that makes sense, we'll put this part with this part with that part with that part, and that's what I'm going to show you. All the things I've read and watched, that's what I'm going to show you. I put them all together, and I kind of figured out, you know, with the common sense and logic and a little physics and stuff, I know this sounds all pretty complicated, doesn't it? No, it's not. Don't worry about it. It's not that bad, but it's stuff you need to know. Okay, so just give me a minute. I'm going to go get the horse, bring it back here where he's supposed to be, and undo some stuff, and I'll show you what we're talking about. Well, it's now a couple days later, actually, I'm afraid. Yesterday was ridiculously cold. I didn't really want to be out here. I couldn't be out here in bare hands for sure. Well, it got a little crazy busy around here, and somebody showed up I had to do business with, so a couple days later we are now going to finish up this video. And we still got the same horse, same saddle though, and we're still going to talk about the same things. We're going to talk about the rear cinch, and we're also going to talk about, well, generally a lot of adjustments you can make on your saddle that will either be beneficial to the horse and or you. Yeah, well, if it's good for the horse, it's good for you, because you'll have less trouble with the horse if the horse is happy. So keeping the horse happy is pretty important. So adjusting things so that the saddle is comfortable for the horse is important. And having everything adjusted right for you is also important. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too, because stirrup adjustments and a few other little tricks I'm going to show you when it comes to your stirrups. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we're going to start out with, I'm going to get them turned around, and I'm going to undo everything and show you what I was going to show you before. And explain a few things, because with everything on the horse, I can't really show you, and you might not understand what I'm talking about because it's just a little bit trickier. So give me a second, and I'm going to undo everything so it's hanging down, and I can show you what I'm talking about. Okay, now when it comes to the purpose of the rear cinch, well, basically its purpose is to keep the back of the saddle down. Exactly why, well, that's another story. And one of the reasons this particular saddle has one is it is actually a roping saddle. And one of the really interesting features on this one is it's not unusual to see some wrap around the horn, and a fairly large horn on a roping saddle. But usually this is actually rubber, like an old inner tube or something. This one actually has leather on it. Honestly, it's this is actually the first saddle I've ever seen that has leather on it, which is kind of interesting, but we won't go into that too much. But the rear cinch is primarily used for roping, so that when you dally onto a rather large steer or something and it pulls forward, the tail end of the saddle doesn't come up. That's the purpose of it. Now, I've heard a few other people say they like these things because if the horse takes to bucking, keeps the saddle a little firmer on the horse, and they have a better chance of riding out the buck. While my theory is you shouldn't be getting on a horse that's prone to bucking in the first place, and save yourself the money. I actually did buy this center section. I think I don't know what they call this part. One of these parts is called the billet. I don't know what the other part is. Anyhow, these parts were already on the saddle when I got it, so this one was not horribly expensive, so I bought that just to finish off the set. Because I was in the store anyhow, because when I get a new saddle, I always buy a brand new cinch, because that's a safety item, having a good quality cinch that's not all weathered and rusted and everything else. I also had to buy the new offside latigo and the latigo for the other side too. So anyhow, I want to show you a little bit about the purpose of, one of the things that's very, very important is this little strap between the two. Now, it doesn't look like much, but that's important because that keeps your rear cinch from going back up under the belly, which can make the horse buck. And you don't want that. Actually, if you've ever watched a rodeo, either live or on television, you'll notice that just before the guy comes out of the chute, you'll see the guy right behind the rider pull up on something. Well, he's pulling up on what they call a buck strap, and it's actually a strap that goes around the belly, and it makes the horse buck more. And so that's the purpose of this, is so that this doesn't turn into a buck strap. You don't want it going back to the belly and making the horse buck. Very important. If you're using a rear cinch, you must have this little strap. Now, one of the things that, these things are actually fairly easy to adjust, and I'm going to talk a little bit about theory on why you adjust them different ways. Some of them, too loose, absolutely not good. I would agree with that. I've heard that many times, and I would definitely agree, because if it's loose enough that the horse can get its back foot caught in there, you can have all kinds of problems. Some people think they should be loose enough that if you get a twig or something under them, it can still fall out. It doesn't stay there and irritate the horse. And sorry, I had to stop and get a horse. He thought he should go for a stroll. I don't know. Usually he's pretty good about just standing here, but every once in a while he thinks he needs to go for a stroll. So anyhow, the different tightnesses now. Having a little bit of looseness in there so that twig doesn't stay there, it kind of makes sense in a way, but it actually defeats the purpose of it in the first place. And I'm going to do this thing up here and explain a little bit about how tight it should be and why. Now, as I've said before, I'm not terribly inclined to use one of these things. And but I'm going to talk a little bit about it, because like I said, the purpose of these things is to keep the back end of the saddle down when you're roping. That is the prime function, even though some people think there's other reasons. And I'm sure there's a lot of people using them, don't even know why they're using them, and don't know much about actually tying them down or tightening them or anything. And I'm going to talk about one of the ways of doing it that I think is probably the right way is, now you don't want to, it's not really possible to get it super tight because it doesn't have a pulley leverage mechanism like your front cinch has, but you can get it snug. You know, you can get it decently snug, and I think that's probably, you know, you can very easily slide your hand in there. It's not real tight, but it's snug enough that it's going to do its job, which is to keep the back end of the saddle down. That's what it's there for. It's to keep the back end of the saddle down. Now, like I said, depending on what you think the reason is for keeping the back end of the saddle down, that's kind of irrelevant, but that's what its purpose is. And unless you're roping, you actually don't even need one of these things, and if you take it off, that's okay. That's one less thing to do up and mess with. But the front one, now that's another one, because like I said, I just bought this saddle, so I had to adjust absolutely everything on it. I bought new parts for it. I had to adjust things. I had to adjust the stirrups. I had to adjust the cinch. I had to oh, yeah, when it comes to getting this back one centered proper, very, very easy. And because I'm going to talk in a second about adjusting this front one, but to get this back one centered, so easy. Just count down the number of holes you got where the buckle is, and you should have the same number on each side, because this strap is exactly the same on both sides. So if you got even number of holes, it's centered. Problem solved. Now, when it comes to getting your cinch centered up, it's actually pretty easy. Even though there's holes on one side and then you tighten it up on the other side. You do want it centered for a couple of reasons. If it's not centered, you might not be able to tighten it enough. If it's not centered, it's basically not going to work properly. It's not going to displace pressure. And a very simple way of checking is, once it's all done up, and you can hardly probably can't even see, there's right in the middle of the cinch, there's a little ring there. Well, there's actually one on the front and the back of it. And the one on the back is the one you attach the strap to for your rear cinch. And the one in the front is, if you use a breast collar, it would come up here and attach to your breast collar. But if you look underneath, and if those loops are dead center, if that cinch is centered under here, that's the easiest way to tell. Just look under here. If it's in the middle of the rib cage, you got her good. Now, as for how tight, well, I've talked about that in another one, but another thing you can do is, when you look down there, is if you look underneath, and that strap going to the rear cinch is pretty much in a straight line, you got everything pretty much dead on. And it can take a little bit of adjusting. Don't just tighten it up real tight right off the bat, just slightly snug, and then go to then check and see if it's centered, because you might have to loosen it off again anyhow. So you can go over to the other side and let it down or take it up a notch and try it again. And if it's way off, well, you might have to do 2 notches, whatever. But you'll get it sorted out. But that's the easiest way to make sure it's actually, everything's good, is just take a quick look underneath here and see if those rings are in the middle. That's the easiest way to do it. Is just take a glance underneath. Takes a half a second to just take a peek underneath. And if it's in the middle, then you look between the front legs like this, and you see that thing right in the middle, you got her bang on. Now, given the various dimensions of horses, it may never be perfect. One notch might be just a little one way, one might be the other way. pick the one that's closest and go with that. It doesn't have to be perfect. This isn't rocket science. And this is also one of the reasons that I use the longest cinch you can buy is, for some of you this won't apply because you might be a little smaller than me. But for me, any horse that this cinch is too big for, the horse is too small for me to be riding, so I don't worry about it. I buy the longest cinch you can get, which is a 36-inch. I don't know what that would be in an English, but, well, they do up a whole lot different anyhow, but a different system altogether, which I'm not fond of, and I'm not being critical of them because actually I learned to ride with an English system. So I'm familiar with them, and I know how they work. So anyhow, and I'm going to get back here in a second to some other items on this saddle that you need to know a little bit about too. Okay, now I've talked before a little bit about how tight your cinch should be, and as a rule of thumb, you know, once it's all done up, you should still very easily be able to get your hand in behind there. If it's a little too easy, you might want to snug it up a little more, but you should always be able to fairly easily get your hand in behind. That's my theory anyhow. So, now that you got your cinches all done up on your saddle, let's talk about your stirrups because that's kind of important too. That's another thing that's adjustable on the saddle. And the length of them. There's a couple different systems that they use for buckles in here. I've already adjusted these ones. I'm not going to mess with them anymore. We're going to leave them alone. But having them adjusted proper to your needs is actually fairly important because it gives you more stability in the saddle and balance and all kinds of things, not to mention a great deal of comfort. Because if they're too short, you are going to end up with sore knees. And well, actually, I'm going to start off. I saw this little thing on social media one time, and I think it was meant to be humorous. But actually, it's pretty true. It says, if your knees hurt, your stirrups are too short. If your bum hurts, your stirrups are too long. If everything hurts, they're just right. And honestly, that is pretty much true. Now, there is, some people will say that when you stand up in the stirrups, that you should be able to lift yourself off the seat by X number of inches. I don't know what it is, you know, that much or something maybe. I don't know. This is what, I got them set to where it's comfortable for me. I can still lift myself up out of the seat. And by having them that short, I can keep enough weight in them that I don't lose a stirrup while I'm riding either. I can, even just the weight of my legs just resting in them will keep them right under my foot. These ones in particular are actually fairly wide as well, so it makes them a little more comfortable, which is kind of interesting because this isn't meant to be a pleasure saddle, it's a roping saddle, but let me tell you, this thing is ridiculously comfortable. Now, so getting them adjusted right, that's pretty important, and take the time to do it. Some saddles, it's a bit of a hassle. It's actually a fair bit of work. This one, the leather is kind of stiff, and I actually had a little bit of trouble getting them into the proper holes and everything, but we did get them where we needed them. But something else I want to talk about, and I'm going to show you a little trick in a second here, is you will notice with this saddle, even though if you actually look at the date on it, this was originally a trophy saddle, or it was a prize saddle or something at a rodeo, bull riding champion, 1981. So this saddle's 40 years old. In spite of the fact that it's 40 years old, it doesn't have a twist to the stirrups like that, which is kind of surprising. It's actually starting to now, and I've only been working on it for 2 days now that I've had them twisted. And now there's a couple of solutions to your problem here. Almost every single saddle, now this one is, like I said, it's surprising because of its age. It's 40 years old and they're not twisted. That's actually rather surprising. But most saddles, brand new, are going to be just like this. The fenders are going to be completely flat. Now there's a couple solutions to the problem. Now for some people you might not even care. For me, if the stirrups aren't well twisted, the pressure of them on my feet cause discomfort in my feet and my knees, and it's not fun. I really like to have stirrups that are twisted, and in a well-worn saddle they generally will be. However, there are a few options to getting your stirrups twisted if you find the need. Now, like I said, some people might not care at all, might not matter to you one little bit. But if you want those stirrups twisted, which has a significant advantage, particularly on the other side when you first get onto the horse and you're trying to get your foot in the stirrup. If it's sitting like that, it's a whole lot easier to get your foot into than if it's like that, because you have to turn your foot to get it in there. Yeah, or reach down, and very inconvenient. Much quicker and easier if it's twisted like that, which is ideally, because that's the direction your foot's going to be pointing. You know, your feet don't bend that direction. At least mine don't, unless you're severely pigeon-toed. Anyhow, so there's a couple of solutions. Unless of course, like I say, if you don't care, it doesn't bother you, okay, you can ignore this part. But if you want to get your stirrups twisted like this, you have a couple of options. Now, one of the first two options, both cost money. And the one I really don't know a darn thing about, but I'll talk about it anyhow. The first one, though, is you take your saddle into a saddle maker and you pay them, and they will, I don't know exactly what their process is, but some of them now completely disassemble the saddle and take these off or whatever. I don't know how they do it, if they steam them or what, but when they come back, they'll be like that, and they will stay like that. You'll pay for it, though, and you'll be without a saddle for a little while, too. That's one of the downsides. One of the other options is you can actually get stirrups that have swivels. Now, I have never used them. I've never tried them, so I can't really tell you a whole lot about them. I just know they exist, and actually, I've never even seen them in the store around here, but I know they exist. You can get swivel stirrups. Now, I suspect they would have a downside in that when you're trying to get on and put your foot in, they might tend to want to turn when you don't want them to. But your fenders would still be laying perfectly flat against the horse while your stirrup is turned like that. Now, if you give me a second to take this off the horse and put it on a stand, I'm going to show you yet another method that you can use that is basically free. Takes a little while, but it's free. You can do it at home. You won't be without your saddle. So just give me a second and I'll show you. It's a real old school trick that's pretty simple, actually, but takes a minute. Well, you got to be patient for this one, but you're also going to have to be patient while I take the saddle off. But of course, for you, it will only be a couple of seconds because video. Okay, so with your saddle on a saddle stand, and depending on your saddle's, come on, Clint, get out of here. We don't need you anymore. You're a good guy. Go on, off with you. Your saddle stand might be a little different than this one. There's lots of variations, but and unfortunately got a lot of this stuff in the way that you can't see very good what we're doing. I think we'll throw that up on top as best we can. And you'll see that, well, stirrups tend to want to sit pretty much flat. Now, as I said, just in 2 days, look how much I've got them turned now. And that's by doing exactly what I'm just going to show you here. Now, you can use a broom handle, a little stick of wood, whatever's handy. I happen to have this little stick handy, always kicking around. So this is what I'm using, and because it's handy, and if I'm not using the saddle, I'm not using the stick either, probably. So it's very easy to put it back when I'm not using it. But I'll show you what you do is you're just going to take your stirrups, and actually I'm going to start on this side because you can see a little better. Oh, more interruptions. Had to stop and answer the phone. Anyhow, since you can see better on this side, I'm going to start with this side. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my stirrup. Now that's about where you want it. I'm going to go a little bit past that, and I'm going to put my stick through. And it's going to come out the other side, but I'm not going to stick it all the way through yet. Because I'm going to go around the other side, and I'm going to turn that other one the same and finish pulling that stick through. So we'll just go over here, turn this one around, and pull it through like that, and there we go. And it can sit like that whenever I'm not using it. And eventually, the stirrups are going to be twisted so that when I pull the stick out, this takes a while. It's not a quick fix, but it's free. But when you take it out, eventually they're going to stay like that permanently. And eventually, hopefully eventually, you aren't going to need to do this anymore. But for the time being, because these ones are pretty much straight when I got it just a few days ago, I've been doing this. I will continue to do it. This is what I did with my one other saddle, and it works well. It takes time, but it's free, and it's something that just about anybody can do. Now, occasionally, you will have a stand where there's stuff in the way, like this one here actually has a lower rack. I can still go either just below or just above it. So, I'm sure you'll figure out a way of doing things. So there you go. I think we've covered just about everything when it comes to saddle adjustment and fit and things like that. And, well, the only thing I haven't talked about is the saddle pads. You'll notice on this one I'm using a blanket, which is quite thin, but it actually works quite well. Nice thing about the blanket is it can be folded up. It doesn't take a lot of room. It's easy to carry and store. And I can also use it as a dust cover for the saddle. Mind you, you can do that with your saddle pad too, but this thing's a lot easier to just give it a shake to clean out the dust and stuff too. But I'll just touch on that one briefly. Is like I said, it's thin. You'll notice it is thin, quite thin. And there's a reason for that. That was actually quite intentional. I haven't used a blanket in quite a few years, but I thought I'd try something different. This saddle happens to fit quite well on the horse as it is. So I thought I don't really need a lot of padding to correct the shape of the saddle to fit the horse. So basically we just need to keep the saddle clean. And blanket does the job. And so that's all we're doing. And a lot of people think that a thicker pad or thicker blanket or more layers is beneficial to the horse. Not necessarily. In fact, sometimes it can actually make things worse. If the saddle fits relatively well to begin with, you don't need a thick pad. And if the pad is actually thick, quite thick, a lot of people seem to think that that'll make it more comfortable for the horse. No, it'll mean that your saddle isn't going to fit as well. And it's going to be uncomfortable for the horse, and it's also going to mean your saddle is going to be prone to shifting. The thinner the pad you can get away with and still have a decent fit, the better off you are, because the saddle is going to stick on that horse a lot better. You aren't going to have as much of a layer in between that can move. So there you go. Your saddle pad, keep it as thin as you can and still have a good fit. Your cinch, I showed you how to get that centered. Here's another view of these two little rings, the one on the front, one on the back of it, that you can see hanging down underneath. This strip, if it's in the center, and these rings are in the center, because pretty much all cinches have these on for attaching your breast collar and rear cinch to. This is if you're using Western, by the way. English, that would be a totally different story. But on English, it'd be more like doing up the rear cinch. They actually have straps on both sides you tighten up, and you can simply make sure that you got the same number of holes on both sides, and that way it would be centered. But anyhow, so you can get this centered by using the rings as your guide. If they're in the middle of the horse, you got the thing centered. Don't over tighten it. That can be uncomfortable for the horse. Rear cinch, you don't actually need one unless you're roping, but easy way of centering that is just make sure you got the same number of holes on both sides. It'll be centered, and then you can take one more quick look underneath, and if the strap connecting the two is pretty much straight down the middle of the horse, you got her made. Want to twist your stirrups? Like I said, take a stick. Well, you got three options. Two of them cost money, one's free. Takes a little longer, but it's free. And you can see even just in a few seconds that I had this in there, it's actually already, it turned it a bit, and it wants to stay there now. And when I put this back on the saddle stand in the tack room, I'm going to put this stick back in it again. And in time, in a relatively short time, well, it all depends how patient you are. It's probably going to take, depending on how much you're using the saddle, and if you always remember to put the stick back in, it could take, thickness of the leather, and I guess there's a lot of variables, humidity and stuff, but it may take a few weeks, maybe a couple months, but it's always going to be gradually improving. I mean, you can see how fast, and this is very thick, dry leather too, so, and it's still improved rather quickly, so I suspect that it's probably not going to take all that long. Some leathers might actually, this might happen a little quicker. You'll notice the one's turned a little more than the other. The other one is actually underneath the D-ring too. If I pull it out from under the D-ring, it'll be sitting closer to where that one is. So this method does work. and it's free. Like I said, broom handle, that's one of the favorite things. You got a little scrap of wood, 2x1 or something like that. Stick in there a piece of copper pipe. This used to be a lunge whip, whatever. Anything that will keep them turned. You can, like, again, I'll just show this to you one more time, and I'll do it from this side because I'm over here. I'm just going to turn this one. On the other side, the D-ring, that works better. There we go. And then we're going to go on the other side. See, it wants to be the other way. That's okay. We're going to fix that. And then we're just going to take this and turn it past where we actually want it. There. And when it sits like that long enough, eventually the leather will settle into place. It'll develop a memory. And then when you take the stick out, your stirrups are going to be straight. Like I said, the other two options are take it to a saddle maker and pay money, not have a saddle for a while they do it, or buy swivel stirrups. Again, I say I've never used them, and I do see a downside to them, but maybe they'll work for you. I don't know. And the other option is free, do it yourself. And I guess you can't even see down that far right now. So, okay, you can see how I got the stick in there, how I got it running through the two stirrups. The stirrups are twisted further than you actually want them, but when they sit like that, once you take the stick out, they'll go back to approximately where you actually want them. And eventually, I mean, not right away. It'll take a while to do this. Like I said, might be weeks, maybe months. I don't know. There's a lot of variables, but like I said, it's free, and you can do it at home, and you aren't going to be out of a saddle while it's happening. So there you go. I think that wraps that one up. A few tips on some of the adjustments you'll have to make on your saddle to suit you and your horse. And every time the saddle changes horses or riders, you're going to have to readjust most of that stuff. Well, the stirrup length you won't have to unless you change rider, but if you change horses, you're going to have to change your cinch adjustments, both front and rear. And, but that's not a big deal, and you should be regularly checking that to make sure it's working well, because especially if you start out with a young horse, as it gets older, it's going to build muscle, it's going to get bigger, and you are actually going to have to readjust that stuff. And maybe it gains some weight, maybe it loses some weight, if it's fat, skinny, whatever. There's a lot of things that can happen that will necessitate the readjustment of your front and rear cinch. And again, you don't really need a rear cinch. A lot of people use it just because it's fashionable. They think it looks Western. Unless you're actually roping, you don't really even need one. And I only am demonstrating this because it's only the second saddle in my life I've ever owned that actually had a rear cinch that I could do this with. I have 3 saddles at the moment. The other 2 do not have rear cinches. And so there's absolutely no point in even talking about them much because I can't really show you anything. But like I said, unless you're actually roping, you don't even need one. But again, this is in fact a roping saddle. That you'll notice this one saddle string has a loop on it that can go over the horn. That's to put your lariat in, your rope. That's, you throw your rope in there, you hang it on the horn like that, and it hangs from here. And so this is in fact a roping saddle. And that's the whole point of it. Everything about it is designed for roping. But I'm not going to use it for that. I'm probably never ever going to rope. Hi, buddy. But it also happens to be an incredibly comfortable saddle. It's a good quality saddle, and the price was right, so I bought it. And even though it's not exactly the right type of saddle for what I'm doing, and I will probably never ever use it for its actual intended purpose, it doesn't really matter. It's still a decent saddle. And excuse me, sir, you're getting between me and the camera again. And in spite of the fact that, and this applies to you too. If you come across a saddle that you like, that is comfortable, fits you, fits your horse, works for what you need it for, maybe it's not exactly the right kind of saddle for what you're doing, so what? Use it. If it works for you and the price is right and it's there when you need it, use it. Doesn't really matter. Just because I'm not roping doesn't mean I can't own a roping saddle. Have a good day. Go play with your horse.